Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Bernstein, your moderator today, and thanks for joining us. This is an unprecedented, difficult time for the FDA community, particularly those of you who are subject to the RIF. But we're here, once an FDAer, always an FDAer, and that's why we're here to share with you our career journeys. And the FDA Alumni Association is here for current, former, and transitional FDA folks. So a short commercial break for the FDA Alumni Association, which is the host of this webinar. So the FDA Alumni Association is the official network of former and current FDA employees. It was established over 20 years ago, and the motto is serving those who have served. The current president, Deb Otter, is here with us today as one of the panelists. So feel free to jump in and do a commercial at the beginning or at the end as well, Deb. The FDAAA has supported our FDA colleagues during these difficult times. So check out fdaaa.org for resources and some statements that we've made. We are behind those lawn signs that were posted outside White Oak. And yesterday we hit CIFSAN, CVM, as well as White Oak. And thanks to Nancy Myers, who is on our webinar today, and her sign brigade, who is out there early posting these lawn signs. So hope you've seen them and gave a little pause there for the moments. We organized this series of webinars, one yesterday on foods, vet med, and tobacco. Today is human medical products, and tomorrow we have one focusing on practical tips for job hunting for drugs and biologics counsel, with a focus on law firms, and Elizabeth Jungman will be the moderator for that. And we have more tools, more webinars, and outreach programs in the planning stages. So if you aren't a member of FDAAA, please consider joining. Due to the current circumstances facing the FDAers, we're offering you an option to waive the first year's dues. So go to the website and look for that information. Deb, anything else on a plug for before I move on?
Did you mention tonight's mixer?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, stay to the end, but at the end, when you sign off, head to McGinty's in downtown Silver Spring, which is close to White Oak, from 5:30 to 8. There's a mixer for FDAAA members, for FDA current employees, for transitional employees. You do not have to be a member to come, but we could tell you about membership information. And I just heard that there may be karaoke. So if you want to join, if that entices you. Anything else, Deb?
We were joking about karaoke, but seriously, I mean, on
Oh,
behalf of the FDA
okay.
Alumni Association, I am the chair. Nancy is the chair ex officio, and Susan's been on our board, and other folks have all been really involved. And we're for folks who are joining who've been ripped from the agency or who feel like it's they have to go look for a new role. You have our support. We know this is really difficult. We're sorry you're dealing with this. And, as the association, and Elisa did a great job of telling you about our mission and our vision, we want to be here to help. And we're trying to help offer moral support, opportunities for networking, concrete information about looking for next jobs. And there are a lot of good folks, a lot of whom will be there tonight, who would be happy to try to help you. I know all of us are having regular conversations with people who just need some input and insight. So happy to talk, but let's get to the webinar because I think that's what we're here for.
Thanks, Deb. So today we're focusing on career journeys that these great folks have taken after leaving FDA. And so we're just giving some general thoughts on post-FDA employment. So if you're still at FDA and considering a move, be sure to consult with ethics office before jumping in. That's the kind of one practical note. We are not taking live questions, but I know folks have submitted some questions beforehand, and we have incorporated those into this webinar. So listen up. And one final point is the session will be recorded and it will be posted, I think, on our website or YouTube channel. So we will figure out how to let you know if you want to see the replay of that. So let me kick off introductions, starting with me. I'm Elisa Bernstein. I was at FDA for 31 years. I retired 5 years ago, having worked mostly in the commissioner's office and my last 10 years in CEDAR's Office of Compliance. I then went to a pharmacy association, the American Pharmacists Association. And last summer, I set up a shingle, opened my own consulting firm, and I now focus on regulatory policy, strategy, and compliance. So I am now going to turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves and talk about their first post-FDA job and what led you to that job. So Deb, can you kick us off, please?
Great. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa. So, um, t- uh, I'll tell you a little bit about my career journey just to kind of give a sense, just briefly, and that'll lead me to my first post FDA job. I'm a lawyer by training, started as an FDA lawyer in private practice way back when, went to the Department of Justice, where I was a prosecutor on behalf of FDA for 7 years, bringing civil and criminal cases for the agency, worked at FDA as head of CEDAR compliance and deputy commissioner for global operations. Leaving the agency, I wanted to really learn what industry was like. And so my first role after the agency was as head of global quality at a large generic drug company. I will say that if my goal was to have a front row seat into the pharmaceutical industry, learn operations, learn commercial, kind of learn a company, it was a great place to be in that respect. And I worked there. I also worked for them doing regulatory policy and quality policy and serialization and international trade, and went from there to the brand side, where I worked at AstraZeneca doing central regulatory. I also have hung up my own shingle. I serve on a couple of corporate boards, and right now I run a company called Healthcare Innovation Catalysts, which is a broad-based regulatory consulting shop doing pre and post-market work for drugs and devices, as well as reimbursement and military health. So done pretty much all of that. And again, my first goal and role getting out of the agency was to learn a lot about industry. And I did.
Rob, you want to jump in? I'll let you guys kind of jump in on, on this one.
Sure. Well, thank you, Lisa. So Rob Berlin, I much like Deb, I started in private practice working on FDA issues, medical devices specifically. Then I went to FDA for 11 years. I was started in the chief counsel's office where I worked on drug and tobacco issues. From there, went to the Office of Policy, and then from there on to the Office of New Drug Policy when that was being formed, ran the Division of Clinical Policy. So that was my last role there. Then my first job in industry was at GSK. I was the head for U.S. regulatory policy. So really looking at, all the sort of policy implications for FDA. Probably a particularly logical move coming out of doing clinical policy at FDA into that role. It was a great experience getting a sense of sort of how the industry works, knowing what the kind of regulatory questions are. And in a lot of ways, I think you think about the same issues, although you think about them with the lens of your specific company and the specific issues that you're facing. So that was great. And then about 5 weeks ago, I switched over to my current role, which is at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, where I'm the executive director of regulatory policy. So similar work there. There'll probably be some FDA liaison components to it, as well as doing kind of policy work. Yeah, it's been a great experience.
Nancy, you want
I'll
to jump
jump.
in?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So my name is Nancy Myers. I run a consulting firm. Also, I'm a lawyer, so it seems like we've got some hidden patterns here. I worked when I was at FDA. I had two different jobs. I was in external relations when Mark McClellan was the commissioner, and then from there I became the special assistant to the COO of FDA at the time, which was Dr. Woodcock. And my, I came to all of this in a very what I always called my checkered past, is that I am a lawyer by training, but I did a stint on Capitol Hill. I worked for the health insurers, for the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. I worked for Bio. I did a series of trade association jobs. And then I was served as a Wall Street analyst, and then quit to stay home with my kids and couldn't do it without a BlackBerry. So I had to jump back into the FDA. But after FDA, my first job was I basically went to another trade association, and it wasn't quite exactly what I was hoping to get out of it. So when I jumped, I started my own consulting practice, and that was 20 years ago. And Catalyst, basically, this is not Deb's Catalyst, this is a different Catalyst. This is a pre-Deb Catalyst. But what we do is a lot of regulatory policy work, but we work with a very broad range of people, from the patient groups to the trade groups to companies to really, really introductory startups. So we have this kind of really broad remit. So I'll just stop there and I'll turn it over to Steve.
Hi, welcome everybody. Sorry that you're in the situation that you may be finding yourself in. My name is Steve Needleman. I'm the lead quality system and compliance consultant in the FDA practice at the law firm of King & Spalding here in Washington, D.C. Unlike most of my colleagues, both on the panel as well as where I work, I am not an attorney. My background comes from 34 years at FDA, where I retired as the Deputy Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs, having oversight of all of FDA's field investigators and the Office of Criminal Investigations. Prior to that, I headed up the agency's Office of Enforcement. I spent about 24 years in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health throughout the Office of Compliance, and began my career as an investigator doing inspections. My first job leaving FDA, I was recruited out of FDA as an executive vice president of a large international consulting company for all of the FDA practices, pharmaceuticals, medical devices. Didn't have tobacco at the time, but we did bioresearch monitoring, and all focused on quality systems and all the related regulations associated with that, whether it be post-market reporting, et cetera. We also had a group that assisted medical device firms in pre-market applications, 510Ks and PMAs, and assisted firms in assuring that they were compliant with all of these regulations, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all, and for the first time really understood the ramifications of living and working in a business environment, and it was extremely educational. With that, I guess, Susan?
Great. I'll pick it up, and great to be with all of you, and I'm thankful to be on this panel, and wishing all of you who are watching good luck in your search as you pursue things. I'm Susan Winkler. I'm currently at the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA, or the FDA Foundation. I was at the agency in late 2000s and saw an administration transition at that time that was very different from this one, but had a similar dynamic in that my position there was terminated as part of the new administration. So when I looked at this, when we were talking about this, and they said, what was your very first post-FDA job? I'll tell you, my very first post-FDA job is that I needed a little bit of a sabbatical. I needed to take a couple weeks to decompress and to heal, and then to decide what I wanted to do. And so if you find yourself in that space, it is really important to take that bit of investment, because the couple of days or couple of weeks, it's okay to do a little bit of that and have it be what you need in that transition. Then I'll say I was incredibly fortunate to craft together a position that, so I'll say in that sabbatical time, I said, what do I want to do? I said, I want to be at a nonprofit, and I want to check out what this consulting thing is and see if I can have a combination role. And so I was fortunate to craft a role to serve at the Food and Drug Law Institute, so the nonprofit piece. And then I had a 4-hour-a-week gig as a consultant, which introduced me to the for-profit world in an important way. I learned a lot, and then continued that journey, ended up buying into that consulting firm later in my career, and then decided to return to the nonprofit space. So that's a bit of the journey there. I'll note that Elisa and I have both worked at the American Pharmacists Association and the FDA, and it's my privilege to collaborate with everybody on this panel and everybody on the call.
Thanks. Yeah, as you guys are sharing a little bit of the snapshot of your journey, I realized I was thinking about all the times I worked with all of you, which is great. I mean, this is a great panel, and it's really kind of finding all of these different pathways and journeys that you took. It really did come together, and you guys will see at the end of in the next hour and 15 minutes how there are so many different options and different places to go if you when you leave the agency. So let's jump to looking at those technical skills, because everybody has different. You are all in different positions. You all had brought different skills to the job. You all learn, because one of the things about FDA is what you learn in school or what you learn in previous jobs is not what you do at the FDA. So you learn a lot of technical skills and information that you can then take outside. So starting with Rob, so what were some of those skills that you took from FDA that were most valuable for you in the private sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest thing is you learn to look at problems from a lot of different angles. So when I went to FDA and I started in the chief counsel's office, you're working with all the lawyers, right? So you sort of had that, and I had that lens from working in a firm. But you start to pick up all the different considerations that come in from other groups that I don't think people outside really pick up, right? So, you know, I think about even working with you, Elisa, right? Like you had particular, yes, you're a lawyer, but you had particular drivers for you in the compliance space, right? That had to do with understanding how staff works, understanding how your work actually filters out. And I think that's something people don't realize quite how rich of a background you have when you come out and you understand all those different places. I will say, just as an anecdote, I mean, one of the funny parts for me being out is, you know, when in reg policy, we'd sometimes go and have meetings with FDA, and you'd have a listening only session with FDA, right? And the people within the company walk out and they're like, they told us nothing. We didn't get anything out of that. But I'd sit there with a colleague of mine who was, you know, former FDA person as well. And we're both like, that was a fantastic meeting, just because you understand the way that the agency works, right? The questions they were asking you weren't telling you where they were going to go on policy. Like everyone was very, you know, appropriate in that way. But you're like, the questions they're asking you tell you that they're thinking about the issue. You're bringing something new to them. And I think that's like, I don't know if it's a technical skill, but it's a knowledge of sort of how things work that goes beyond your technical skills that really gives you another kind of angle, right? And that's why I can say, at least in the stuff I do for reg policy, you don't have to be a lawyer. You can be a scientist, you can be a clinician, you can go from all these different places. You just have to become conversant in those other areas. And that's what you're getting out of FDA. I think most people would be surprised how many other parts of the organization you understand well enough to be a contributor. So,
Do you or anybody else have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think having the inside baseball, as Rob said, having knowledge of the inside baseball tact is really valuable once you leave the agency. You know what the agency's expectations are. You know what they're thinking. In my particular situation, I was very fortunate in that I assisted in the development of the medical device quality system regulation, both the first and second version. I participated in GMPs for the 21st century with pharmaceuticals. I'm familiar with ICH and ISO guidelines. I served on the Global Harmonization Task Force for Devices, et cetera. So I brought a very strong background in the quality system side of things and knew what the agency's expectations were. Didn't quite appreciate when I was in the agency what that return on investment could mean for a firm. It was really just comply. But once you leave, you begin to realize there are ramifications, there are business ramifications that need to be taken into account. And that you have to understand that you have to build a system that's sustainable but applicable to a particular firm. That it's not going to break the bank when they go to apply it, that at the end of the day, that you have comfort that they are compliant and that they'll provide the safe and effective pharmaceutical or device or biologic that they're intending to sell, and that you did the best you could without breaking the bank for that firm. They need to understand the return on investment by increasing brand loyalty and reducing recalls. And lawsuits, tort actions are all important, and that it's really good business sense to comply with the FDA requirements.
Yeah. I mean, I'll add something. I'm just sitting here thinking there's sort of two sets of substance, I think. One is understanding about the FDA. And Rob and Steve, I think, spoke a lot to that. Here's how the agency functions. Here's how the agency thinks. Now, granted, that's changing some, but keeping an eye on that and having a deep grounding in how FDA functions, and in a way that I think you can't replicate if you haven't been at the agency. And there's also the part of what did you learn at FDA? You learned how to be a reviewer. You learned how to be an effective lawyer, an effective communications professional, working within a complicated organization. So those are both relevant skill sets. And I would think of them both in conjunction, but also somewhat separately. Because, for example, I've worked with folks on the preclinical and the clinical side who have a depth of knowledge and understanding that they gained at the agency that's really helpful for a company that needs to be on the other side developing that, not just because you know how FDA thinks, but you know how to write, you know how to review, you know how to analyze, and all of that's valuable skill set.
So that's great. So let me take that and spin it just a little bit in terms of, so you have this experience, you have this expertise that you got at the agency. So if you were in an interview and selling that experience and expertise that you got, how would you highlight that? And would you? I imagine you would, because there's a niche there, but how would you do that? Susan, you want to start?
I'd love to. So I'm glad we're teeing this up, because translating your FDA experience requires intentionality, right? Everybody on this screen held different roles and brings different experience to the outside world. But I would bet that we've all been in a situation where a potential employer saw FDA and they made immediate assumptions about what it is that we might be able to do. Someone said to me, "Oh, this is great. You could join our company and help us with our 510K application." My response to that was something slightly more formal of like, I can't think of anyone who's singularly less qualified to help you review your 510K application than me. And so you do need to be clear about what you did and avoid, right, the acronym or the abbreviation or making any assumptions about what that interviewer or that company knows. And one of the ways I think about it is that I reflected on, okay, when I was on the playground explaining to other parents what I did at FDA, that was actually a good start. Because it was translated into some very basic, like, here's what I do. And then I refined that to say how, kind of that very basic explanation of what I had done at the agency. And then I connected it to what could help the interviewing company do something better. So it was that initial translation and then making that connection. Okay, I am talking to Rob at Vertex. Here's how what I did at the agency can help Vertex in the role that they're advertising. Not that you're interviewing me, Rob, but just so you know. So that's just a couple thoughts, Elisa.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that concreteness is really important and helpful. I'm going to flip it on the side. The first time I went for a job interview at FDA, way back when, this was not actually the job I ended up in. I ended up in a detail. But somebody who worked at FDA prepped me for that interview. And she said, people are going to ask about the programs. How does this relate to their programs? And I said, what's a program? So don't go to your interview in the private sector and start talking about programs, because people won't understand. So talk concretely about what it is that you know and how it can help them. And I think it's flipping that on its side. At the same time, emphasizing kind of how much you understand about the ecosystem, about the policy, about how the regulatory process works. And again, as Susan said, debunking the view that you can do anything and everything FDA, because that might get you a job, but it's not the job you want if it's not the job you're qualified for.
Yeah, don't oversell yourself. It's really important. I've been on many projects, long-term remediation projects, and firms said, "Oh, it's great. I just hired an FDAer." And I go in and speak to that FDA, and it may be a pharmaceutical remediation project, and these people did foods work at FDA. They oversold themselves. They were totally unqualified for what they did. And to Susan's point, I spent 24 years at CDRH at the Center for Devices. Don't ask me to help with a 510K or a PMA. There are other people for that, and I have many times turned down jobs and referred them to other people. Be honest. You're not selling a product, you're selling your reputation, and ruining it that way really is silly. It really doesn't gain you anything.
So I agree with what everybody said. I'll flip, I would say be genuine in who you are. Don't over, I think it's you've got to be clear who you are, and also you might want to be memorable. So try to think about what makes you special to others. My daughter just went through an internship interview, and she has a radio show at her college. And somebody said, wow, tell us about that radio show. Did you do it because you're really good at speaking? She said, no, I'm a terrible public speaker, and that's why I took the job, and it's helped me get there. Her genuine thing is not, I'm this great speaker. She's like, I'm trying to learn it. And those people have been following her, offered her, even though she didn't take the job with them, they're pursuing her. So I think that's one of the things that just be genuine in who you are. But the other side is, clearly with as many people in the marketplace now, you're gonna have to be at the top of your game. And when you go in for an interview, you have to know the company you're interviewing. You need to understand where what are their products, or what is their law firm focused on. Like, really do your research on the organization that you're going to interview, and try to figure out what their opportunities are and their challenges in this current environment. And then really, you might, if you know who your interviewer is, make sure you look at them, look at their LinkedIn page, look at who they know, who is their network. Because one of the things that when you only have an hour to speak to somebody, you've got to find those connections, just kind of like what we're doing here. Oh, yeah, I worked with you. I worked with you. Everybody's doing their connections. And so try to really do your research before you apply for a job. Once you're in the interviewing process, I think it's more labor intensive than, when I got out of law school and I sent out, 200, requests for a job, to send my resume to everybody who had a mailing address. Now it's a lot more targeted. And so you have to be a little more careful. But the other thing that we've talked about when we talked about your skill set coming out of FDA, your network at FDA is of value. It's not only what you know, it's who you know. And you don't want to walk into an interview and say, hey, I'm best friends and play tennis with this person. You might not want to sell that relationship like that. But you can say, I know lots of people in this division because I worked with them collaboratively on a project that was this. And so you want to be careful about your relationships and how you present them, because there are people who will want to hire you just because you worked for somebody and they want to get in to see that person. And that effort gets old. And so you don't want it. So be very intentional about your relationships, how you want to use them with the agency, what that network that you want to be leveraging, and just be very intentional with that.
Great advice. So I'm gonna actually build on that, because one of the other, I think, often underrated but really important are those soft skills that you learn and you get while you're at the agency. Like, for example, for me, after being there for 31 years, I had various different kind of levels of responsibility for whether it's a project or an office. And I think my superpower that I got from FDA was to be able to lead and collaborate. And I took that into the next job that I went to. And I think that those are very valuable, underrated, and you don't maybe understand that you're gaining those soft skills. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Deb, you want to start?
Sure. I'm just interested that you have superpowers, Lisa. That's excellent. Um, so I mean, I actually, although I would say most people leaving FDA have superpowers in some respect, I think what is really unique that you don't necessarily appreciate when you're at the agency is how you have to navigate a very complex environment. There are a lot of rules. There's a very complicated organization. There's a political overlay. There's sort of with a big P, there's a political overlay with a small p. There are different kind of levels and types of leadership that come and go. So I think that ability to navigate a complex organization is really important. I also think that people from FDA often have amazing strategic skills. They don't even realize, but they're often given opportunities to formulate new policies, to think creatively, to have to focus not just on here's my task, here's my deliverable, but more importantly, here's my public health mission. And how am I going to find a way to achieve that goal? And what that means, I think, is that people have had fantastic experience of finding a means to an end and formulating a strategy and a plan to get there. So those are, I think, other superpowers that I would emphasize.
Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Well, I also might mention that you could be a team player. I mean, when you think about what we all did at FDA, it's you rarely are working in a vacuum. You're working with a team, you've got to negotiate. And I think that ability to collaborate on some very, Deb kind of said the public health mission, that's something that's missing in a lot of these corporate cultures these days. So your ability to highlight that I like to work in a team, if you do, but and I know how to do it and I know how to navigate it. That's a soft skill that is really appreciated by senior management. Sorry, Rob, you were about to say something.
No, I completely agree with what's been said. I mean, I think notwithstanding the most recent activity, like FDA is a very stable place. So you've had to navigate an environment that really has people that you're going to work with for a long time, right? Like almost any other workplace is going to have more people coming in and out of it. So there's a real skill you've developed there to have credibility and to work well with people, right? I mean, I think don't underestimate that. Like you've worked in an environment as complicated and sophisticated as any company or law firm is going to be. So.
Yeah, let's hope there's stabilization soon. So let's moving on to kind of where you went at in your journey. So many of you were lucky enough to have multiple options. And what were some of the factors that helped you decide what was that best fit for you? Who wants to go first?
I'll be glad to go first. So after I left the initial consulting firm that I was recruited out of FDA for, I was very fortunate in that I was recruited by a number of other consulting firms, by law firms, as well as by corporations to fill different roles based upon my experience at FDA. It was important as I considered these next steps that you be comfortable with an organization that aligned with your own priorities, and that they aligned with your beliefs, or at least felt that they were interested in adopting your beliefs or considering your beliefs. There were many firms that I went to interview with that they just, you knew you were going to be pushing uphill from the very beginning. There was no commitment from top management for compliance. They felt it was a cost option, it wasn't necessary. We'll take the risks. And that's not necessarily the kind of environment that you want to work in, but it is an environment that you can help with. And so for those that have that option, and that's their only option, do the best you can to get them to understand the public health implications of working and complying with FDA. As I said before, the only thing that you have to sell at the end of the day is your reputation. So you want to align with a firm that you're not going to constantly be fighting and pushing uphill with. Make sure you can get along with the people as best as you can assess during the interview process. Try to speak to some of them individually, but at the same time, at the end of the day, when you make the consideration, you do the best fit you can, and it probably won't be the last job you're ever going to have. So take it as a learning experience as well. Sometimes you learn more from failure than you do from success. So again, having the option, make sure, do the best you can to make sure you fit in with the people you'll be working with.
Yeah, if I could build on that, I think Steve has a great point, and then that so you do want to make sure there's some element of fit, and then recognize, right? Like, I think any of us who have had a dream job, it may not have been the dream job when we came in. We helped make it that. In that it was what you were learning, it was the projects that you had an opportunity to do. So I would just say it's really important to assure that there's a fit. And then once you're in an organization, see if you have the opportunity to make it an even better fit. And make sure you're also thinking about what are all the considerations that are important to me. For me, I had to write those down and be like, okay, that in one of my transitions, timing was important. I wanted to be settled, frankly, before I had another kid. So it was important that opportunity was available to me at the moment. Also important, just other dimensions of what it is that I'd have responsibility for and what is it that I was going to learn. I loved that Deb mentioned that when she left, she wanted to learn about, a large pharmaceutical organization. That can be a really helpful attribute that you look for is, okay, so what do I want to learn and where might I learn that? And I think that also opens your eyes to opportunities that you might not have known were available before that.
Anyone else
Yeah.
want to? Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I'd sort of pull a few things out of there. They've largely been said, but culture, I think, is important. I would look again, and as Steve said, find it. There's no perfect job, in my opinion. There's some great jobs, and there's some okay jobs, and there's some not so okay jobs. But you want one that's good for you as a next step. Culture is important. What am I going to be doing every day? Really practically. I mean, it's easy. I think people get stuck in the grass is greener, I'm going to go there. But really, how are you going to spend your days? And who are you going to be working with? I think those, and who are you going to report to? Those are sort of really important, concrete questions. Given choices, I would think about those issues.
Well, and one of the things that I was always coached is don't think about your next job, think of the job after that. Because if you want to do, if your dream job is you want to be chief scientific officer of a company, going into patient engagement may not lead you to be chief scientific officer. You may have to go through another job to get to that next one. So think again about what skill set you build at that next job to the next one. And then if you don't like a job, you take it, it's the first job you find that you like, but then you get in there and you don't like it, you're not stuck. You just go find another job. So I think that's another thing is if it doesn't fit, just recognize it. And that's not a failure, but just move on. And so do think about that, if you're playing checkers, you can always jump once, but if you can jump twice, you get much further. So think about that second one.
That's great advice. As we're planning for the some additional webinars, I was hearing during the planning that people said that, you know what, if you're from FDA, you're marketable. You'll find a job. It's just finding that best fit for you. And I agree fully, Nancy. The best fit may not be the next job, but it's the one after that. It could be the one after that. So if you are in that position, and well, let me step back. If you had to do everything over again in terms of your career journeys after FDA, is there anything you would have done differently? Who wants to start with that one?
I can start. I mean, I don't know that I would say I was actually very happy with the step that I made, and I liked my experience. I think maybe things to just keep in mind as you're coming out of FDA. I really did think the FDA was sort of the center of the world. honestly. Like it sort of seemed like the most like important part of all organizations, right? And so you come into a company, and I think I sort of thought the same thing, right? That sort of FDA considerations would be number one in all the thinking, right? And you realize it's not true, right? There are so many other functions that have to think about. They have to think about market access, public policy, all these payer aspects that come up there. I would say R&D is huge, but that's the science part of it. A lot of it's about early R&D, right? It's about development, those things. So, I wouldn't have done anything differently, but I think like I think I would have hit the ground running. Maybe I'll say this, I would have hit the ground running better if I'd sort of appreciated how many different components come into a company. And that's probably worth doing some digging as you're thinking about not necessarily even where you land, but when you land, so that you really you hit it running, right? Because to me, I thought there were things that would just be obvious, like, well, we should pursue policy to encourage more flexibility around accelerated approval. And you're like, okay, but that's only one consideration that the organization has out of all these other things that they're thinking about. So I guess that sort of context is really, it's important and helpful when you're starting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I would say is think through all the considerations we've raised already. In terms of what would I make sure to do, and if I were doing this all over again, and I was talking to myself back then, I think that I would talk about the culture and the responsibilities and the organization and who you're going to report to, what you're going to do day by day, and really think about that, and think about also, I mean, to Nancy's point, the next job, but also, does this get you on a path, right? It's not, some jobs can, you kind of think, okay, I'm going to do that job, and then it's not really going to be clear where I'm going to go from there. So let me make sure I can at least imagine something, some doors this is going to open. The landscape's a little different, but generally probably you have a fair amount of leverage and opportunity now. And then if you go, for example, into a corporation, you're kind of on a path in corporations types of roles. It doesn't mean you can't expand it, but think about whether that's the path you want to be on. That may be great, but I would think about the fact that, okay, I'm getting on a path, I could deviate from that, but what is that path? So at least I know that's something I at least feel like is a good shot I want to take for the longer term.
So Nancy, earlier you mentioned about the networks and how important that is. And I always tell my kids as they're, looking for jobs, and they don't believe me, but I always said it is who you know, or who knows someone. It's like the Kevin Bacon, right? And networks and connections are so important. And I'm going to, for a moment, give another plug for the mixer shortly after this. If you join late, right after this, there's an FDA Alumni Association mixer at McGinty's in Silver Spring from 5:30 to 8 p.m. It's a great opportunity to network with some other current and FDA alumni if you want to make some connections. So back to our normally scheduled webinar. So Nancy, going back to you, since you raised it, how did you leverage those connections and networks when you were looking for a new role?
Well, so I think I'm a natural born networker, which I'm not sure everybody is. So surprise. But so to me, I, so I'm one of those rare birds where I like looking for a job. And the reason I like looking for a job is it's the only opportunity you have where you can call anybody in your network and say, "Hey, can I just can I just touch base with you for 15 minutes? I just want to hear what you do, what you like about your job, and I just want to hear from you and learn from you about what you like in your career." And then when I listen to them, and then you're kind of like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. Who else does this? Do you have a friend that could, who else should I talk to on this? Because I'm really interested in this. And so and if it comes from a place of being genuine, I think the networking can be even more important than the job that you get. I got to tell you, I've done, in my younger days when I would interview for a bunch of jobs, those people that I interviewed with that I did not take the jobs that were offered, those people became my friends and they became my, mentors. Even for my, when I left the agency, I went to a trade group I mentioned, but wasn't loving it. So I jumped out to create my consultancy, and all four companies that had offered me jobs, they picked me up as a consultant. So I had a consultancy within my first week of starting a company. But it's because I always keep in touch with people, and using LinkedIn is a wonderful resource that wasn't there in the Stone Age. Use that. If you, I even posted on my little LinkedIn that, let's make lemonade. If you have been laid off and you want to talk to somebody, I'm happy to talk to anybody. Anybody on this call would be happy to talk to you. The Alumni Association is going to work on some mentoring opportunities that will help you expand your network. But it doesn't have to just be your FDA network. It can be any network that you have. And you can also, the great thing about LinkedIn is you can open up anybody's network and see who they know. So if you're interviewing for a job and it's at a company, say, oh, like Vertex, and you open up and you say, oh, Rob works at Vertex and I'm interviewing there, let me call Rob and talk to him and see what he likes about Vertex. So just this whole networking thing, sometimes it feels very self-serving, but if you do it in a way of every time you talk to somebody about their job, you're going to hear what they prioritize. Like for me, I always go work for somebody that I like. I think that is more important than really what you're doing, what your company is. If that person is going to take the time to develop you to get to that next step, I'll work for them. And there are people who will bring you along with them. So I think that networking, use your FDA network, and especially right now, I know that people who have just been laid off must feel terrible and just feel like, gosh, what did I do wrong? Or what could I have done differently? But the great thing is that the network is wide open for anybody who wants to use it. People know what's happened. They too feel terrible that it's happened. And I think you'll have a lot more people willing to spend the 15 minutes to talk to you, to open up their networks to help you out. And that's everybody on this call has been trying to get people jobs. There are a whole alumni association that's trying to get people jobs. There are people on LinkedIn that in the industry and at the law firms who are all trying to help you guys get jobs. So use that network. I'll stop there.
Oh,
I think that was great. I mean, sorry, Steve. I'm
No,
going
go
to say
ahead.
people love to be asked. They want to help. And I'm emphasizing the things Nancy said. And you don't have to just call them and say, can you give me a job? It's can I talk to you? Yeah, I just want to emphasize, I think those are excellent points, Nancy. And I think that resource is really, really out there for you. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, to what Alyssa said as well, it's who you know, both in my experience, not just at FDA, but in industry as well. People who, for example, I was able to get several of former FDA, recently RIFT FDAers jobs based upon people I knew in industry that I thought were reasonable firms that, were looking for people, and I thought it was a good fit. At the same time, professionally, as you're interviewing or whatever, the fact that you have connections at FDA that you need to continue to nurture. Just because you knew somebody and you haven't spoken to them in 5 years, that's not really a connection. So try to stay active with those connections at FDA. I know throughout my career, I stayed close to a lot of people. I have very good connections at every level of the agency, and I went back into training for the agency. Maintaining those connections and maintaining those networks are really important. And that goes for industry as well, not only through the FDA Alumni Association, but as they said, LinkedIn. There are other opportunities. Take advantage of whatever opportunity you can to network with industry. You can never tell what's going to fit, what's going to be a good fit, and what can happen. Network is really critical for your success going outside the agency. You won't realize until you leave the agency that the environment is completely different in the business world, and it's something that will be eye-opening. So, just keep that in mind.
But just to talk about networks, you have RAPs, the Regulatory Affairs Professionals. You have DIA, the Drug Information Association. You have FDLI, and Susan knows a little bit about them, the Food and Drug Lawyers Association. You've got the groups in the med tech, like every little area, the medical devices, foods, veterinary medicine has their trade groups and their professional groups. And you just have to get in and, and work those. And sometimes it might be that you write a article on something that and post it, or you and then people link in with you. And so you can create networks that way, even at a whole cloth. Just be creative.
And
I think
many of these trade associations have job boards, and you should keep that in mind. FDLI has one, mostly on the legal side. MDMA does for devices. AdvaMed does for devices. Other of these trade organizations also have opportunities that, especially that you may be looking for right now. I have clients that call and tell me they have openings. They're looking for people. Some people may need to consider relocation, but there are opportunities out there.
right. In addition to some of those organizations Nancy mentioned, I mean, within disciplines, quality, toxicology, clinical, there are organizations and networks that get together there. And the other thing I encourage people to do is go to events. Go and meet people, go to lectures, go to meetings, go to conferences, and just put yourself out there and get to know folks. As Steve said, you never know what's going to fit. And you never know where those connections are going to go. And reach out to people you don't know on LinkedIn too. If you reach out to someone who's an FDA alum who you don't know, to say, hi, can I talk to you? I'm willing to bet likelihood they'll say yes.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, I just recently hung up my shingle to create my consulting firm. And when I was trying to figure out what passed, so I was in some same shoes, but I had the time to figure it out. And I did reach out to people that I haven't talked to in many years, but they were FDA colleagues at one point. And everybody was so helpful in helping me kind of zone in on where I wanted to go. So, and it was all the networks, it was all my FDA peeps that helped in how to figure out where to go. So I moved into the consulting space. Let's talk now about the different spaces and journeys of that folks can take. So several of you have also worked in the consulting space at different size firms. Can you share one thing you liked or did not like about working in the consulting area? Who wants to go first?
Well, so since I'm a former consultant, why don't I do you might not like this part in consulting. So what I found, and I did love my consulting time, but what I found as a detractor is that you might be working with a client on a really intense project. So you develop these deep relationships, you get really invested, and you deliver your final report, and then you're done. And you might not ever overtly know what happened to that work, what decisions they made, where it landed. And so you can't rely on knowing what happened as being your satisfaction of a job well done. It's got to be about the journey and the project that you're working on, because you may not know how things end up netting out, or you see it in a press release that randomly comes across, or you see it, no one will reach out and say, hey, Susan, remember that project we worked on? Here's where it landed. Like that, they just don't have time for that. And so that was the one thing where I was like, okay, I had to learn that. And then I was much more comfortable in kind of the consulting role, because looking for fulfillment from knowing exactly what happened, it's just rarely going to happen when you're a consultant.
Radio silence is very frustrating in the consulting world. And similarly, I've had the experience of working on a project and then getting the response, we decided to go in another direction. And then you know it's the wrong direction. You try to convince them it's the wrong direction. It's counter to everything FDA would expect. And then the only somewhat satisfaction is 6 months later, they'll come back to you and say, we need to go your way. We realized we blew it. So there's a lot of money spent on consulting, and to waste that money was just ridiculous. So yeah, I agree with you. Radio silence is very frustrating.
Yeah, Steve, actually, I'll say there's a lot of money spent on consulting, less money spent on listening to
Yes,
what
correct.
you might say. And then there are those who listen really well, but it's still not their role to make sure you know how everything netted out.
Exactly.
So Susan,
So-
I learned to cook, and that's my, I can start and then I see my accomplishment, and so that's how I solve that so that need. So something short that's done and I can see the end. But consulting, it can be you can work on you could have a short-term project, but you could be working on a long-term project that doesn't show up for 2 years, which does happen too. So.
Which is what we did at FDA, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
So
way more than 2 years.
Right. Especially if it's good.
I've been on remediation projects for better or for worse for some of our clients that have a year and a half, 2 years I've been on site. So it's a long journey, but the good part of it is when you get success with FDA and you get a firm out of trouble and you just pray that they don't say, we can go back to our old way. But hopefully you built a system that, in our case, for enforcement type issues, that they'll sustain and keep moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say one thing I like about consulting is I see a huge variety of different companies and different challenges and new technologies and innovative thinking. And in some ways, I'm learning more than I've learned in any other job because each job was in one organization. You learn about that organization's pipeline, that structure, challenges. But I meet new companies every day. And I hear about what they're doing, and I hear about their regulatory path or their compliance challenges and what's working and what's not, and where they want to go, and help them to get there. And that's really interesting. And probably for some people, really a downside too, because it's hard to ever really feel grounded because you're working with new companies, new projects, new challenges all the time. So, that's a question to ask yourself if you're thinking about consulting. How do I feel about this? This is really different than just working for one company all the time. And I think it has definite upsides and some downsides too.
Yeah, unlike FDA, you're not going to be doing the same thing every day. It's a whole new environment. You can never tell every day, as Deb said, you could be working for a different company, different project, different issues.
So another group that we haven't really talked about is working for a trade association. And that's another one that I think people should really consider. I think the advantages of working for a trade association is that you can go in, you get to see all the players in a certain area, all the companies, and you get to see who is really good. You get to see what types of products they're all making. You get to see how their management behaves and, how they think differently and they act differently. It's great at trying to find consensus and trying to get people on the same page. And then, going to that checkers thing, going to the next job. You get, say if you're in the medical device area, if you went and worked for Avamed and sat there and saw all the device manufacturers out there, you picked which ones really has a technology that you love. You see a management group that you love. You see all these decisions that they're making, their CEO that you love. Then you you look at it and say, okay, now how do I find a job with those guys? And you start working on that as your next job. Or, there are lots of those companies, but I just think that's another one that people don't say, my career aspiration is to go work for a trade association, but it is a great place. I definitely, when I worked for the managed care industry, because I used to do a lot of reimbursement, that was, seeing how the plans made those decisions on products and technology assessment companies that process was really interesting. Then then I went to bio and I looked at all the biotechs and thought, you guys, you have to develop a product. You have to understand the reimbursement to develop the product. So let's go. So I think you can take, there are lots of different areas you can go into. You just have to really, in this environment, you're going to have to be a little creative.
Yeah, on that note, when I left FDA, I went to a pharmacy association, a healthcare professional association, and it was an association that I was a member of since pharmacy school. And Susan, in fact, used to work there as well. And so it was something that they were looking for someone who knew government affairs. I worked for the government. I knew government affairs. There are associations all over the Washington area and outside the Washington area that want to know your thinking and insights on what's happening in the government. And some of that is translatable to not just FDA, but other agencies as well. So that was the nonprofit space. Let's go in that direction. And Susan, you are in the nonprofit foundation space. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what should folks keep in mind if they're interested?
Yeah, so in the nonprofit space, there are a lot of very interesting positions. I mean, and then as you're thinking about those, I guess I'd say what's nice about the nonprofit space is are often get exposed to a lot of different things, and you have the opportunity often to do a lot of different things, right? Like a nonprofit is just going to inherently is well, a nonprofit now. As a lawyer, I'm going to stop speaking so declaratively. Often in the nonprofit space, there'll be a more lean organization than you might find in the for-profit space. Still have support for things, but you will find a wide range of opportunities to do things. But there are different fits there. It's often about the understanding what are the important metrics for that organization is going to be helpful in seeing if that's a good fit for you. So the nonprofit space, I find it rewarding because I'm driven by what can I learn and what impact can I have, and that just happens to be something that you have great opportunity for in the nonprofit space. You can do the same thing in the for-profit space, but I think in the for-profit space, and you can all correct me if you disagree, but there's one performance metric that matters the most, and that's the margin. And right, like you have to pay attention to the dollar. Again, super important. And you have to pay attention to the dollar in the nonprofit space too. I will say some folks are like, well, I came to the nonprofit space, so I don't have to worry about, I don't have to worry about revenue and expense anymore. You do. If you that it still matters in the nonprofit. If you don't have any money, you don't have any mission. And so don't run to nonprofit if you're like, I don't want to have to think about I don't want to have to look at balance sheets or think about the money side. You do, but it's only one metric, and then that organization will have other metrics that are just as important. It might be the number of people who are reached, the number of individuals who are served, and it does. There's some benefit to being a .org the same way there is benefit to being at a .com. Different vibe, but definitely great opportunities in the nonprofit sector.
Thank you. So let's turn to just some practical advice if you're looking for another job. One of the first things you do is you update your resume, right? And then, because you need to figure out, some of you probably haven't even updated your resume in years. So what do I put on paper? How do I do it? How do you navigate some of those application processes for the private sector? So let's focus on that and particularly kind of resumes. So who wants to go first? Deb?
Yeah, sure, I'll start that. So I think two things. One, be concrete. I think that FDA resumes, a lot of FDA resumes that I've seen are very, again, program focused, like ran the program or led a cross-functional team or oversaw this, that, or the other thing. A classical private sector corporate resume that I've seen will have like, drove synergies of $500 million in 6 months based on, acquisition of $3 billion company. You're not going to get there, but I would look for concrete things, concrete issues you worked on, guidances you wrote, if that's the case. And things you did. If you're going for a leadership position or management position, then you could talk about your leadership or your management experience. If you're going for an individual contributor position, talk about what you did as an individual contributor. The other thing I would say is it's a little bit of an exercise in thinking through your audience. I mean, really try to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's hiring you. What are they looking for? What's their job? And don't necessarily have one resume, right? You might have one resume that you're using for nonprofits, one resume that you're using for companies. Smaller companies are different than bigger companies. Think through with particularity what it is that they need out of you. If what they want is your FDA network, okay, you could talk about all the different organizations you worked on within FDA. But again, so I think we talked about that's not really a career. That's a bit of a, hire and use you and move on. What is it that you know that you've done that you can bring to the table and that you can build on?
And Deb, if I could add to that, you may have different versions of your resume. Every single cover letter should be different. It should be tailored to that organization and that opening. I might spend, work on your resume up front, and then the cover letters matter. And please don't have any typos in them.
And then if I can add to that, so there are a lot of different there are a lot of different templates for resumes out on the internet. Really take a look and see which ones you like. I think there are a lot of options, and then you might want to run it through ChatGPT and see, because one of the things that I'm hearing, and I haven't experienced it myself, but is that a lot of the firms have an AI, they kind of have an AI screen that's looking through resumes to figure out who gets the first interviews. And they're looking for certain words. So that is some of what you might want to do some researching, not only on what is the role, but look up what those roles do and make sure you use some of those active verbs to try to make sure that an AI program will pick that up. If it's something where it says you have to be an MD, make sure you've got your MD, or if it's, just there are some mistakes that are made on the AI front, but just I think you want a resume that looks good. It also has to be short. These are not our traditional scientific CVs. If somebody sends me a 3-page CV, it's not a resume. So make sure that you're really looking at what is current and there's so much online that you can find. So leverage that too.
But just
That's an interesting point, what you were saying, because some say resume and some CV. And that's actually an important kind of pinpoint of are you sending a 3-pager or a 25-pager with all of your presentations and publication? If it's 25 pages, it's probably too long, regardless.
Well, and what you can do is you can send out an attachment of your what you've written. So if it really is that important to what role you're trying to get, then put it in as an attachment or something like that. But people only read, they're spending a short period of time on screening, because I know at one point I had a job open and I got 2,000 people to apply to a job that I thought I'd get 2 people to apply for. And so now people have to screen them very quickly because it's so easy to toss in a resume. So that's where, again, Susan, your point on the cover letter, your cover letter is key.
Yeah, I was on something that Deb had said before about I think you really do need to highlight your individual contribution to materials. I think that is a common mistake in interviews and in resumes that I've seen, right? Where you sort of, the worst thing I think you can have as a reaction from people, other than if they just genuinely don't like the person, is the second worst is if they're like, I can't tell what they did, right? Because that's pretty much always disqualifying, right? And I think that happens more often than people would think. And some of it can happen because in FDA, there's a lot of matrix projects you had, and you're trying to not, it comes out of a good place. You're trying not to like obscure the fact that maybe you were the original drafter, but 20 offices contributed and did this and that, but they need to understand what you did, right? You were the author of that, author guidance on X, and you can, if they get into like, well, who did that run through? Okay, that's a good chance for you to explain, like, worked with OCC, worked with office policy, worked with office of regulatory policy, whoever else, right? Like you can explain that, but you need it to be clear and succinct, and that's, yeah.
So let's turn to industry now, as we're looking at the different lanes. So in industry, there are so many different people actually have already been asking me. So what's the difference between an executive director and a senior director and a director and a manager and the industry space? And how does that relate to I'm a consumer safety officer or a regulatory project manager? And like, how do those relate to some of those positions in industry and how and those skills that I learned at FDA, how do those then translate to industry? So Rob, I'm going to start with you because you're in industry.
Yeah, well, and I welcome input from others too, but I'll give you my quick take. Typically speaking, if you were sort of a senior individual contributor, your most logical step over is going to be as a director. Sometimes something like a senior director, but typically that's sort of a director to my mind is like an experienced individual contributor. Above that, when you get to things like senior directors, executive directors, VPs, those are almost always going to be supervisory positions. There are exceptions where someone's, covering an entire area by themselves. You might have the VP of digital transformation who might not have reportable people, but that's typically what you're going to see, I think, is most often. So manager, so you'd go director, associate director, manager, are typically sort of the steps that you would see in most companies. At least that's what I've seen where I've been.
Right.
There's a lot of variability though too, I think, in titles. I think if you go to a consultancy, right, it may be different. So someone who's um, you know, what an executive vice president means in a company of 20,000 people versus an executive vice president in consultancy are different, right? Like in terms of what's expected and what's the experience. So hopefully that's kind of helpful. But I don't know, Deb, I mean, you have the experience of seeing otherwise.
Yeah. It's different in small companies. I mean, Rob's kind of covered it, but in case you didn't get it, sort of usually a manager, senior manager, director, executive director. Some places have associate vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president, and then up into the C-suite. That's sort of basically it, but you can ask them. Generally, manager, senior manager, or relatively junior positions, and sort of director, I think, is as Rob said, sort of a experienced individual contributor. I think that's right. It varies a little bit by company, but I think you could, if they offer you a role, you could ask to see an org chart and just sort of understand how you fit in. I mean, I wouldn't neglect the fact that once you get an offer, you can ask more questions. By the way, if they say, "Oh, and you get such and such stock options," what does that mean? Like, can you tell me more about that? I mean, I think there are a lot of folks who leave the government who don't really understand how to think about that in industry, but there are plenty of us who've been there and done that, and there's plenty of information available online. So I would try to learn that as well. But yeah, I think those are good questions. And by the way, like if you're going to apply for a job for Vertex, I'll call out Rob. He could probably help you if you volunteering you. But you could probably find someone who's an FDA alum who's at that company, and you could ask them.
But it's also and Rob mentioned this, but I'm going to underline it. The size of the company matters. So if you're if you're a startup and you're a director, that's going to be different than if you're at Pfizer and a director. So just know that the size, and also it's also management. So oftentimes directors have people reporting to them, or they should be. And so if you've had reporting experience where you've had 3 people reporting to you, or 10 people, or a whole division, those are things that will help set that title. But you can always go in there and negotiate. I think that's probably one of the things that's probably another webinar. But whenever somebody hands you a sheet of, a job offer, you're not just don't just look at the salary, but look at the retirement package. Do you get stock options? Is there deferred comp? Like there's a lot that you should be able to negotiate that is not a typical negotiation for the federal government, where they say, okay, you've got 2 weeks vacation. I would always negotiate for more vacation. That's what I love to do. So you have a lot of you don't negotiate on everything. Like, don't ask for too much and they think you're a pain in the neck. But pick out what's really important to you. If it's family time on the summer and you need 4 weeks because your kids, that may be more important than the $2,000 or $3,000 that you might be able to negotiate up in a salary. So that's another thing that you might want to talk to, as you're doing some outreach. And I'm already getting LinkedIn requests. But if you are talking to people for that 15 minutes, you can ask those type of questions.
And know how many people you're going to supervise too, if you're going to be in any kind of supervisory role. And it doesn't hurt to ask, have there been problems with any of those employees in the past? What am I getting into? And be honest about it, and tell them you can handle certain things, but I'd like to know at least what I'm getting into. What's the deal? I had that experience in the first time when I left the agency. They sold it as they're a fantastic group of people. They're this, they're that, and I wasn't there 2 days before they said so-and-so's utilization is way down. So-and-so's utilization is this. And I said, what's utilization? I don't even know what you're talking about. So that's why it's important to become familiar. You have to understand, as Susan pointed out and others, you need to understand that these are businesses and there is a profit and loss. And you need to understand that while we were at FDA, we were all insulated from that. And many times, I'm sure many of us heard, well, you're going to bankrupt our company and you're going to put them out of business. And in some instances, I could see where that was a potential. But when you're going through getting a job offer, know what you're getting into, understand exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Nancy had pointed out, I mean, a direct, so I should say it really depends where you are in an organization too, right? So if you're a director in a manufacturing group, for example, you probably have a lot of people reporting to you.
Yes.
Like that's a very different kind of job if you're on the line versus if you're a regulatory professional. So definitely understand how the organization's set up. I think too, I would understand the reporting lines. That makes a big difference, right? You can find out whether your group is in a good position within the company or not, right? If you're looking and you can't figure out why you report into a function, like that to me would be a bit of a red flag. So if you're looking and you think you should be going up to the head of regulatory or the chief medical officer or something else and you're not, try to figure out why. There could be a good reason for it, but you want to know what the structure is.
Yeah, that's actually really important in a company. For example, if you're going to the quality organization, where's quality report in the plant? Does it report to operations, or does it actually report up through to quality? Yeah, I would look at the reporting structure and think through how that's going to impact your day to day.
And I think adding to that, then understanding what people think in the organization of that group, right? If that's
Sure.
that's something you talk to
Sure.
people internally. I mean, I've had different structures in my roles, but it's always been with someone good at the top that enjoyed respect, and that makes a massive difference for your job.
But even asking these questions and talking about this, you might feel hesitant because it is, but I think companies really, and any employer will appreciate that you're taking it seriously and that you're asking the right questions. So that is almost an example, like you don't want to get too into the weeds so that, again, you don't want to be looked at as a pain in the neck. But I think you do want to ask the smart questions so they see the way you approach a topic like this. And so I think it's a great thing to ask questions.
So that is a great lead off to our next and final question that I want to have around Rob and give each of you. The last almost hour and a half, you've been giving some spectacular advice for folks. So if you had one piece of advice to give to someone who left FDA or just left FDA or might leave soon, what would it be? And if you can think about people at different stages in their career, because some people may have just been there for a year, some people may have been there for 29 years or more. So I'm going to start with Susan, and then you guys tag team.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna do the cheerleader side, right? So I'm gonna say to everyone who is looking for something, know that having been at FDA, you are valuable for the right role at the right organization. And so know what you do well. Think broadly about that, right? Don't kind of put it in very narrow lanes. Think broadly about it. And then know that not every position is going to be right for you. So, have I been a finalist for positions and not gotten them? Absolutely. And you take that and say, what did I learn from it? And where am I gonna look next? And how am I gonna learn from that experience? But there is a right organization for each of you.
Can I layer onto that too? Because I'm just sort of trying to think about how folks must be feeling right now. And I've got to say that things did not go down on April 1st on a way that's probably going to leave people feeling too good. That was pretty rough. And a lot of other people have left around this time, the agency, not necessarily on their own terms, or how they would have had it. That's okay. Don't let that bring you down, in the sense that you don't need to carry that to an interview. You need to go confidently. First of all, everybody knows you didn't do it. It wasn't you. You didn't do anything wrong. You were doing a great job.
Despite what they put in that letter.
Yeah, nonsense. The regime changed, and that had an impact on you. That's okay. You can talk about that. And by the way, you will find plenty of people in the private sector whose job transitions were not of their own choice. It's a really common thing, and people get that. And so I would say, with Susan, I want to be a cheerleader, and I also want to say, be confident, feel good. You've done an amazing job. You've had an amazing career, and it's just finding that next step.
You bring in valuable experience to the industry. It's something that is, as Susan said, and Deb reiterated, there's a job for you somewhere, because everybody needs the kind of expertise that FDA brings in. You guys really, through no fault of your own, if you're in that situation, unfortunately was dealt with poorly, as it was mentioned. But you guys really do bring a lot of experience, and don't undervalue it. There is absolutely a need for you guys throughout the industries, whether it be pharma, whether it be device, whether it be biologics, or bioresearch monitoring, any aspect of it. There are unique opportunities for you. There's plenty of them. I would encourage you to look at those job boards that are available all over the place. There is a need, there is a want, and don't feel like you're lonely out there. As mentioned before, all of us in the FDA Alumni Association, I certainly am available to whoever. I'm glad to mentor anybody, and there's lots of opportunities, and we all just wish everybody the best as they go forward.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, I think if you can find a place where the mission is something that you're excited about, where the mission aligns for you, I think that makes it a lot easier to do the work, and it'll make it easier for you to thrive there, right? Because you'll feel that same pride that you had before. And I think I completely agree with everybody's statement that, it's your skill set feels more common than it is, because you worked with people who were close to having, having similar skill sets, and it's not that common out. I mean, having been in now 2 companies. I mean, I can count on my hands the number of people that have experience within the agency, and those are, companies that value the experience. It's just not that many people out there, so I think it probably doesn't feel like that when you're there with your peers, but there is a lot out there, and completely agree with Deb. I mean, it's amazing to me once you're out, people in industry, companies reorg, they do all this kind of stuff. So like, really know you're probably talking to at least someone on your interview panel probably went through that experience. So it's not abnormal at all. And they went through it for reasons that, again, probably had nothing to do with what they did. It was the organization saying, we want to make a change because we want to realign this function over here, or we're dropping that product and we don't need, people who have expertise in X, Y, or Z. So.
And I would just say, dream big. I think it's really important. You've probably enjoyed your experience with FDA and really found a mission in that. Taking a little time and doing that assessment of what you really want to do, that once you kind of I've got college kids that are like, I don't know what I want to do. But if you really take the time to figure out, this is a path that I'm interested in, this is your job, you spend so much time in it, you should really enjoy it. And so try to think what you want to be and then be as creative as possible. We've only talked about a few little niche areas, but you have professional societies, there are so many different groups that may not be that you may not have interacted with at the agency that are available to you. So really take the time, figure out what you want to be, and drink, you have to go into this confidently. And that is the key. And if you don't feel confident before you do it, call your best friend, call your mom, call whoever you can, so you do feel good about yourself before you head into those interviews.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this has been informative, helpful, giving you that kernel of encouragement, and as Nancy just said, the confidence if you're looking for a job, and if you want to network, join us in the mixer after this. We have another plug, FDA Alumni Association. There's more programs and activities in the works. Tomorrow is another webinar for Drug and Biologics Council. Go to the website, fdaa.org. I want to thank Steve, Susan, Rob, Nancy, Deb, and behind the scenes, Lauren Roth and Tony, who have been moving everything, kind of making this all happen for FDAA and for all of you. So hope to see you later, and thanks for tuning in.
And thank you to Elisa, our fearless moderator.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Elisa.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Elisa.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for asking us.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.